Welcome to Always the Journey podcast. Always the Journey podcast, where we will explore the histories, strategies, successes, and hard lessons of inspirational people. I'm your host, Jason Woodland, and I want to know, what's your story? Hello, and welcome to Always the Journey podcast, located here in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is episode number 1, and I am your host, Jason Woodland. I'm extremely excited about this opportunity to jump into a podcast finally. One of my original inspirations for doing something along these lines was actually the movie Pump Up the Volume that came out back in the early 90s, and it was a story about a high school kid that had a pirate radio station. And I always thought that was just so fun, and finally getting around to doing something, of course, not pirate, but having a good time with it anyway. The objective of this podcast, Always the Journey, is really to delve into the histories and lessons and backgrounds of people and to find out what their processes are and what they do to do cool things in life. And today we've actually got a really fun person that I've been actually wanting to interview for a couple of decades now, and finally having the opportunity to do so. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to give a couple of shout-outs. First of all, to a dear friend, DJ Deo, here in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's the one that wrote the introduction music here. Also wanted to give a shout-out to my friend John Lucchetti out of Santa Barbara, California. Gave me a few different pointers and tips and ideas regarding podcasts. And my friend Chris Hollifield from the I Am Salt Lake podcast. He and Chrissy do a phenomenal job with that, and they're do a lot of great work here in Salt Lake City, and really appreciate them. Also spent a little bit of time with Jason Allred and Steve Angel from the Craftsman podcast, and they taught me quite a bit about some of these intricate details and what to do. And of course, always want to give a shout out to my wife, Kate Conroe. She's always got my back in these fun and wild endeavors that I like to jump into. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce my very first guest. He's got an awesome background. He's got all kinds of interesting and cool experiences, and some of that we're going to delve into. But it's actually my father, Larry Woodland. And I want to welcome you to the Always the Journey podcast. Say what's up, Pops. How you doing?
Great, man. I'm happy to be here.
Nice. So what we're going to do is I've got a handful of questions. This may be a little bit more formulaic than a traditional style podcast, but it's because it's my father, and I want to learn about my father as well. Yeah, he's a drummer. He's had all kinds of interesting jobs and some really cool backgrounds. But first of all, Dad, tell us about where were you born and what was your childhood like?
I was born in Salt Lake City, September 12th, 1952. Had great parents. We had a little house on State Street for a while, and when I was about 3, we moved to what we call the big house on Highland Drive. They made some money at the drive-in, which helped us all advance in life as far as living conditions. And I have 4 sisters. I did have 2 brothers. I have 1 brother now. 1 passed away. That's where I was born.
All right, cool. So, what was your experience like in high school, and what high school did you go to?
I went to Olympus High School, and it was really cool. I played drums. We had bands all the way from junior high school, and we used to win the Battle of the Bands, and we used to play at a lot of the dances. And I was so busy playing the drums, I really didn't do a lot of homework, but I did pretty well in school to boot.
Nice. Who would you say is one of your inspirations to get into drumming all to begin with?
Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, those 2. When I was a kid, there were really no famous drummers except for those guys. And I got to meet Buddy Rich.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's a whole story in itself.
Would you like to share that story?
No. He had a swear word to offer.
Well, you can share the story and just bleep the swear word if you'd like. That's not a problem.
Well, we went to a Bravenel Hall to see Buddy Rich and his band. And there was a great big baby grand piano right in front of the drums, okay?
Yeah.
On the side of the stage. And so I went to see Buddy Rich, not to stare at a piano. And there were like 50 or 60 people that couldn't see the drums. So I was with about 8 people. I said, I'm going to go get him to move the piano. And my sister goes, yeah, right. So I ran up the left side, and they couldn't get up the left side, so I went around the back. And it was really funny because I had a blue blazer and a white shirt on. Well, as I went running up the stairs, all these guys with horns are all lined up to go down and get on the stage, like right then. And they all had blue blazers and white shirts on. So I got backstage, and nobody said anything. And I said, where's the stage manager? And he said, oh, he's over there. And I said, well, look, there's about 50 people that can't see Buddy on his drum kit because the piano's in the way. And it makes me get emotional. But this guy standing right behind me says, hey, move the piano. And I turned around, it was Buddy. And I got to shake his hand, and I said, thanks. And I said, we came to see you, not the, piano. He goes, cool, man. He says, I got to go. And then they all went heading down the stairs. And as I walked back and got in my seat, we were about 5 rows back. They came out on stage, and they moved the piano, and it was really cool. Anyway, a few months later, a couple of years later, actually, he passed away, and it was really a sad day for me.
Wow, I bet. I mean, one of your sort of childhood heroes in drumming, and then, of course, you had the opportunity to actually meet him, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. And
have that fun experience. Well, thanks for sharing that. Tell me, what would you say you would have been described as a high school student?
Average.
Okay.
I was pretty popular. I didn't hate anybody. Nobody hated me either except for, Rick Williams, Michael Bath, Mark Dugdale. From junior high to high school, I had to fight all 3 of those guys. And I was always getting picked on because I was tall.
Yeah.
I was taller than everybody, so there was always 2 or 3 guys that wanted to, make me mad. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Michael Bath, this is one I love, this story.
Yeah.
We used to hang out at the Arctic Circle, which doesn't exist anymore. I think there's an office building there now or something. Well, he came over to the Arctic Circle, and he walked up, and he sucker punched me.
Dang.
He was always trying to pick a fight with somebody. So I said, well, just a minute. And I was wearing what we called rough outs, those cowboy boots,
Yeah.
And I said, let me take off my boots. And I went to take off one of my boots, and he sucker punched me again.
What?
Well, yeah, I think I've told you this story. Anyway, so we went at it. I mean, whomp, whomp, whomp. And he swung like a girl. He was a pretty strong guy, but he swung like a girl. Like this, around, like roundhousing.
Okay.
And I had taken karate lessons clear back in junior high school. So I had a pretty good idea of how to defend myself. Anyway, so somebody called the police, and everybody scattered. I jumped on the back of Bob English's Honda 60. We took off. Anyway, I had lumps all over the back of my head because of the way he swung. The next morning, I show up at school. It was hilarious. I walk over. Mike is hugging his girlfriend over by the lockers, and he had a cast
Yeah.
on his arm, a great big black eye, and I didn't have a mark on me. And it looked like somebody beat the crap out of me. But I was just trying to defend myself. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't really want to kill the guy. Anyway, I walked up in front of his girlfriend, and I said, "Hey, Mike, really sorry it turned out that way." And I walked down the hall just laughing my ass off. But a half a dozen people saw that, and that was the last time anybody ever picked on me again. Because Mike was known as a tough guy.
Yeah.
And he blew it. Anyway, go ahead.
That's funny. So I sort of remember you telling me about some story about someone driving a motorcycle down the hallway of Olympus High School. Was that you, or was that a friend of yours?
Oh, it wasn't me. I vaguely recall it, but it was just somebody I didn't really know that well.
Oh, okay.
Just ran.
Yeah, I still have a feeling
Honda.
that was you. Yeah, a little Honda, right?
No, I had a Honda 160.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was you. Well, that's okay. We'll go ahead and move forward. How would you say that your parents described you?
Oh, they were so proud. Well, nice guy, loving. My mother always used to say I was a good guy. You know, that's just, of course, they were that way with all the kids. So
Cool. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit now. My next question for you is, how did you meet my mother? So, my mother passed away January 1st, 1998. Her name was Marcia Hadfield Woodland, and her maiden name was Hadfield, and she had her own record, and she was a really fascinating lady. How did you guys come in contact, and how did that all come about?
Well, when I was in the service, my dad and grandpa built the Woodland apartments, and then I got out of the Army in 1974, and in I was going to be a Utah State Trooper, and one of my relatives were ripping them off, so they said, well, we need to have a manager at the apartments just for, a couple of months. Can you do that and put off your state trooper job? I said, yeah. So 12 years later, I was still working with Dad and Grandpa, running the apartments and doing other real estate events. But to get back to your question, my mother was filling in the office, showing apartments and sitting in the office. And Marcia came in, and then the next day she was going to come back because she had put a deposit down. She was going to come back and get her keys to move in. And my mother was there, and she goes, oh, wait till you see this girl. I said, what are you talking about? Well, she's coming in to pick up her keys to move in. Anyway, so she left. About an hour later, Marcia showed up. And, yeah, it was really a shocker. She was the prettiest girl I ever saw. Anyway, she moved in. I tried to keep it, cool. And we crossed paths a few times, and it was a pretty good-sized complex. But anyway, after about 6 months, I got up the guts to ask her, a friend of mine's going to have a party. Would you like to go? And she goes, well, sure. Anyway, we dated for about 6 months before we decided to get married.
Wow.
And that's it. Just
nice.
Weird events.
Yeah, and she was a spitfire, to say the least. So I know that must have been a fun experience.
Well, we were married for 9 years. We had 2 great kids. Then I was single for about 10 years. And then I got remarried to this lady named Debbie. We were together for about 12 years. And then I've been single now for just since, 15 or 16 years.
Hint to all you ladies out there.
No. No.
Just kidding.
Twice is enough.
So you were, to reach back in part of that conversation, you said that you spent some time in the service. What branch of the military were you in, and what would you say is one or two of your fondest memories?
Well, I was in the Army, in the 1st Armor Division, and I was fortunate enough to end up in Europe instead of Vietnam. And, the nicest thing that happened to me is I was in the 1st of the 22nd Battalion, and somehow I ended up working for Colonel Depew, the commander of the 1st Armor Division. Don't ask me that story because it's very long. But the fondest and the funniest, then I didn't drive trucks. I usually drove a sedan. The funniest thing I remember was Command Sergeant Major Bivens, the Command Sergeant Major of the 1st Armor Division, says, "Hey, I got to send somebody over to pick up a truck. Let's go get it." So we got a ride in a Jeep, and he dropped me and the Command Sergeant Major off. And he'd been in the service for like 35 years. I mean, he was an old battle horse, but he was just hilarious. So anyway, we go to get in the truck to bring it back to Pinder Barracks, which is just outside of Nuremberg. And Command Sergeant Major Bivens says, "Hey," and they used to call me Woody. "Hey, Woody, let me drive. I haven't driven one of these for years." Well, he's the boss, Mm-hmm. What do you say to the Command Sergeant Major of a, division? So I jump in the passenger seat, and they call them deuce and halves, but a 2.5-ton personnel truck is huge. They've got two sets of dualies, and of course the big tires, and they're big trucks. He jumps in and goes, this reminds me of Vietnam. So we start going down. We're right downtown Nuremberg, and by Merrill Barracks. And the roads are not that wide, but they're cobblestone, Anyway, so I thought he had jumped the curb because I felt the truck go bump, and they're big, so you could really run over some big stuff and not feel it. Mm-hmm. So we pulled over to a stop sign. And then all of a sudden I hear this, nee, 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 the police, the police sign, their little green Volkswagens. And they pulled up alongside of us, and they stood out in front of the truck waving their arms like, "Stop," So we get out, and the Command Sergeant Major says to the Polizei, he says, "What's the matter?" He says, "You just ran over a car." There was a Volkswagen who, how when buses take a big turn?
Yeah.
When your aunt one time ran into the bus, or the bus ran into he had crushed the front of that Volkswagen. Nobody got hurt.
Whoa.
But the front of the Volkswagen was, flattened right up to the windshield.
And you guys just barely even noticed it?
Just a little bump. It was just weird. Anyway, Colonel Depew, his boss and my boss, was the community leader for the military in Nuremberg. He would, coordinate with the Chancellor of Germany, who was back then Willy Brandt. And I got to meet him.
Wow.
Because Colonel Depew would go meet with him because he was right downtown in Nuremberg. And talk about the relationships between the Germans and the soldiers, because there were, in Europe at the time, there were about 220,000 U.S. troops in Europe guarding the Czechoslovakian border, before the wall came down. And so it was really eventful.
And I think you told me, too, that at one point you got to work with George Patton's son. Is that correct?
Oh, I was sitting my desk was between the colonel's office and the XO's office, which was the executive officer, which was a lieutenant colonel, okay? Mm-hmm. Colonel Depew was a full bird. And all of their visitors would come right up to my desk, and they would say, "Oh, is the old man in, or is the boss in, or I need to bring some papers," or whatever crap. And it was funny because I'm sitting, and that's when you could smoke in the office. I mean, this was a beautiful building with red carpet and big hallways. I mean, I was lucky. This guy walks up, and he wasn't very tall, and a smoke ring falls right down on my desk. And I looked up, and I didn't realize he was a general, and he had like 3 other guys with him carrying briefcases and stuff. So I stood up, and I said, "Can I help you?" And he says, "Oh, is Colonel Depew in?" And I said, "Yeah." So I pushed the button, and I said, "Oh, there's a General Patton out here to see you, sir." And the son of General Patton then was just a 1-star. And I really didn't even know who the heck he was until 3 years later when I got out of the Army and the movie Patton came out. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, I know who that guy was. I met his son.
Wow.
It was really eventful. But I had a pretty good job. See, in the back of my car, I had Willie Brandt, General Davidson, 2 or 3 other generals, which I can't recall. Alexander Haig was in the back seat of my car when he'd come to do inspections at NATO 2-3, where we used to store all the ammunition and everything. It was pretty cool.
Wow.
And a lot of the guys in the barracks used to call me the Wiglet, little pig, because I always had my stuff starched.
Yeah.
Because, when you're hanging around a bunch of generals, Colonel Depew said, yeah, if you can just look sharp all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
And I did. You could see my face in my boots.
Nice.
But it was a good job.
What was where was your favorite place to live when you were in Europe? Because I know you spent time in Switzerland, Germany. Tell me a little bit about your favorite place to be out there.
In Germany, in Pinder Barracks. And when they were remodeling our places, the command section got to stay over in the BOC, the Bachelor Officers' Quarters, which were really nice. And we got to stay there for almost a year while they were remodeling the regular barracks, because the barracks were old Nazi SS troop barracks, and some of them were just really ripped up.
Wow, I bet. Wow, interesting stuff.
Yeah.
What world event do you think had the biggest impact on you?
Oh, that is quite a question. I think the most emotional event, I think when I was out of the service and I was home when the Berlin Wall came down, when Reagan finagled that deal with the Russians and they tore that wall down. That was the most eventful. Aside from having my 2 wonderful kids, that was the most eventful thing in my life.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Let's take a look at some other questions here. When you think about a fork in the road in your life, what was it, and why do you think you chose that particular path?
Well, it wasn't really a fork. It was a spoon. Well, the most eventful thing, after I graduated high school, I had this girlfriend, and I got her pregnant. And so her parents, they were Catholic and we were Mormons. My parents took me over to their house, and my dad says, hey, well, let's make this work. And her sister came out screaming and yelling. I think she was jealous or whatever, but she says, you got my sister pregnant, and you're not going to marry my sister. And then her mom started to sway with her sister, and then her dad kind of fell apart, and because we were going to get married. So I went over the next day to see her, and her mother answered the door, and she goes, "You come around here again, I'm going to cut your balls off with a butcher knife."
Whoa.
Yeah. I tried to get a hold of her several times, and she just kind of didn't contact me. So the draft came up, and I was just going to go in the Army. But all my friends, let's see, I won't say any names, but Missing Fingers, Glass Eye, Crazy. I mean, these guys spent a lot of time in Vietnam. So I went down to Sergeant Hickenlooper. I'll never forget him. He was the recruiting sergeant down on State Street. And I said, well, how can I get out of going to Vietnam? Because all my friends are coming. Oh, and a couple of my friends died over there, too. And he says, well, you can go to Vietnam or go to Canada and never come back. Or you can enlist and go regular Army for 3 years instead of 2. And we'll guarantee you anywhere you want to go in the world. So I enlisted and picked Europe, ended up in Germany, and 2 days later, I was going to leave like within a week. And 2 days later, I told my parents, I'm going in the Army. And my dad said, you leave here. He says, you try to go in the Army. He says, I'm going to break your neck. Said, it's too late.
Wow.
And 4 days later, I was gone.
Well, I'd say that was a pretty traumatic, dramatic experience, for sure. And I appreciate you sharing that. You know, I mean, you know, that's the interesting thing when we're sitting here with microphones in front of us, we get to sort of delve into different things that we, you know, may not have shared before, and I appreciate that. Let's take a look here. Who is one of the most interesting people you've spent time with? I mean, so to my listeners, my father has got a fascinating background. Has spent a lot of time with a lot of famous musicians and movie stars, and you know, with spending time at the Woodland Drive-In Theater and so forth. And so he's got a plethora of just interesting and bizarre stories. So, Dad, who'd you say is one of the most interesting people you've spent time with?
Well, the person I spent the most time with, where I spent enough time to become friends with him, and he's the only original one that's still alive, even though a lot of the guys were younger than he was. And that is Bob Shane of the Kingston Trio.
Wow. And
he's still alive. And last time I talked to him on the phone, I was down in Arizona after we did a concert, and he played with his guys at the dinner theater. And he left, and a couple of days later he called me and he said, somebody stole my lighter. He had a gold cigarette lighter. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, it wasn't me. I said, because back then I had enough money to buy anything I wanted, you know. Anyway, I haven't talked to him, and I think he is still alive. And I would like to see him before he dies. Hey,
Bob, if there's any chance of you listening to this ever, reach out to my dad and say what's up.
Yeah, really.
So you've told me stories about so many interesting people. I know that you've had dinner with my grandfather, obviously your dad, as well as Frank Sinatra. You spent time with Evel Knievel, Raquel Welch. Who is that other gentleman who is an actor that you are dear friends with? He used to come down to the Woodland Park Apartments and swim. Matthew.
Oh, Matthew Modine. Yeah, he used to, at the drive-in when we had the big Olympic-sized pool, him and Maury, Matthew, and Mark used to come over at the pool in the summer days, and they'd hang outside the fence. And my mom kind of like those three little boys. And I was about the same age then. And she'd say, well, aren't you guys coming in? And they didn't have 50 cents to come in. And so she'd let them in anyway. Just don't tell anybody. Just go on in. And let's see. Mark had a crush on Pam. And, you know, I saw 3 movies with Matthew Modine. And I kept telling myself, I think it was when Memphis Belle first came out. I was looking at him in the movie, and I thought, well, everybody says, well, let's go. And I wanted to read the credits, which I never do. When the movie's over, I just get up and leave. And when I saw Matthew Modine, I thought, you've got to be kidding. That's him. That's little Matty.
Nice.
Anyway, years later, I did some welding out at Kennecott, and his brother Mark was out there. He was a welder, too, at the time. And then Maury was the independent party. He was going to run for Senate, but he was kind of different kind of a guy. And he lives here in town still. And now Mark, I guess he's doing really well. He's, you know.
Nice.
Never did get a hold of him. He was always out of the country or something, doing something. Well, let's see. Well, that's the end of that story. Anyway, carry on.
All right. Growing up, who do you think inspired you the most, or someone who had a pretty big impact in inspiring you?
Probably Howard Hughes.
And do you want to expand on that a little bit?
I just, with his history and everything he did, see, when Howard's dad died, he left him the Hughes Tool Company and $200,000. And that's how Howard Hughes got his start. But he was so flamboyant, and I wish I could have been more like him, but he, you know, at that point in time, he was the richest man in the world.
Right.
Which was in the hundreds of millions. Not like Gates and the other gang now, which is in the billions, you know.
Yeah.
Because from the 30s up till now, they printed tons of money, and so everything is inflated. Anyway.
What amazes you most about society nowadays, like technologically speaking? Let's talk a little bit about that. So obviously we've got the internet. We've got a lot of these different things that have come out of over the last 20, 25 years. Give me your thoughts on a piece of technology that has been just sort of mind-blowing to you.
Well, all of it, all the technology is mind-blowing because it has eaten up a lot of jobs. The computerized technology has eliminated tons of jobs. The only thing is the news media and the human race in general are kind of like sheep. You know, when somebody says something, they all get on the bandwagon like they're being controlled or something. I could elaborate on this for 2 days, but yeah, that's all I want to say.
And that's all I've got to say about that.
That's right.
Hey, when I told a couple of people that I was going to be interviewing you today, they wanted to also learn a little bit. So Tony Reese from Team Reese, Utah, here in Utah, obviously, he wanted to ask, would you do anything different? It's a little bit of a broad question, but is there anything specifically that you would do differently?
Actually, if I would have had the fortitude then, instead of my explorational whatever, I think I would have stayed in college. I went to Westminster for about 3 months before I went in the service. And I think I would have stayed in college and gone into engineering.
Engineering?
Yeah.
And why engineering?
Oh, I always liked to build stuff and work with my hands. And
yeah, well, we've got a question coming up here that's going to speak directly to that interest in engineering. So I think that is definitely fitting. I've got a question here from Nick DeLeo out of Phoenix, Arizona. And he asked, if you could only keep 5 possessions, what would they be? That's a good question. I like that.
That really is a good question. Anything material or mechanical or just 5 things?
Just 5 things.
My house, my apartment.
I think that's a good choice.
Car. That is a hard question.
I know. When he sent that to me, I thought, wow, that's a good one.
Oh, my senses.
Oh.
My senses.
That's actually a great answer. You don't really think about that. You think just materially.
My ability to walk.
Yeah.
And talk. My 5 senses.
Yeah.
And the 5th thing, I would guess my family members. And that's it.
All right. Well, that's good answers there. Hey, thanks, Tony and Nick, for sending out those questions. I appreciate that. What is a favorite place you've ever lived? Like, it could be a country, it could be a state. Since you've been to probably 5 cities in every single state in the country, you've been to multiple countries or houses.
Place was the big house up on Pheasant Circle, right here in Salt Lake City.
What was something that you loved so much about that place?
We had a big yard. The house was beautiful. I just look back at my childhood, and it was just the coolest place any kid could live. With my all 7 kids and mom and dad and the big rooms, the big living room, the big the big kitchen. It was just cool, you know.
Nice. Tell me, we've touched a little bit on the Woodland Drive-In Theater, and I know that's something that my listeners would be really interested in learning a little bit more about. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about the Woodland Drive-In Theater, and maybe share a couple of your favorite memories about that place.
Well, when they opened up a new movie, Dad would like to bring in the original costumes from, like, the Fly, the original Fly, the Alligator Man, the She Creature, and he'd pay our neighbor guys to wear these costumes at the theater.
Yeah.
They were the original costumes from the movies.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
You remember seeing the one with the Fly with
the
big head and the Alligator Man, and he liked to have if he could, get the stars to come on their openings, you know.
Oh, that's cool. Do you remember some of the stars that came out?
Raquel Welch. I held the ladder as she crawled up to get up on top of the snack bar and talk to the audience before the sun went down. That was pretty cool.
Cool.
The coolest thing I remember is when we had, 77 Sunset Strip, the original movie before the series. And there was a guy named Kooky Burns, okay? Mm-hmm. He was always combing his hair. It's kind of like a punky guy as a part of the group of detectives. And Dad bought 2 cases of combs. And he called them Kooky Combs.
Cool.
You know, get your free Kooky Combs. And they were handing them out, and people were wanting to buy them and stuff. Kooky Combs, let's see. Oh, and Dad used to take me out of school sometimes, junior high and high school.
Yeah.
To go to the screenings, you know. Because back then, the theater owners would have to bid on the movies and give a percentage to get the film in your movie house.
Right.
Well, the Woodland Drive-In was the biggest outdoor theater in the world. The screen was 120 foot long, 90 feet tall, and they could squeeze 1,300 cars in there.
Wow.
On 12 acres. It was wild. But he would take me to go see screenings sometimes. And I was the first kid, I think I was about 14 or 15, to ever see the 10 Commandments in the state of Utah.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
At the screening.
Wow. And where did they do the screenings at?
It was called Film Row. It's all offices and apartments now, but it was...
Well, tell the listeners where Film Row was.
Oh, gee whiz. What was it?
South Temple, wasn't it?
Yeah, South Temple. And about 8th or 9th East. Took up 2 blocks. But anyway. Oh, and that's where the original Cinegrill restaurant was. Right in the screening place.
That's right. That's where it got its name.
Yeah, the Cinegrill.
That is really cool.
Anyway, that movie played at the drive-in for almost a year. It made a ton of money.
Wow. I bet.
Anyway.
Oh, that's really cool. I appreciate you sharing that. Tell me about a time. Okay. So this this is something that I talk to a lot of people about because it's just so funny. And I've actually posted this picture on Facebook quite a few times, or shared it anyway. And it always gets a ton of reaction because it looks so hilarious and it's an amazing, funny story. Anyway, tell me, Dad, about the time that you welded a full-blown jet engine to the top of your truck. And tell me about the experience there and why you did it.
Well, it started when Dad met... and I can't remember his first name. I think it was William Lear, that started Learjet.
Right.
Well, he ran across him somehow, somewhere. He knew so many different people. And he had this boat. And he said, where can I get some jet engines? And
because you asked that in normal
Mr.
conversation.
Lear says, go to Arizona, and he gave him the address. And there's a boneyard of 10,000 airplanes and jet engine parts and stuff, and you can go down there and buy a jet engine. Of course, knowing Dad, we took Grandpa's Buick in a big trailer, and we went down there, and he didn't buy one, he bought two.
Oh, really?
2 jet engines. And he knew Craig Breedlove, who had the world land speed record for years. Then he met... Richard Compton, who was the head jet mechanic out at the Air Guard, who used to work on Craig's jet cars. Well, he got all hooked up with these guys. So we put the one in the boat, and it was a...
Do you want to talk about the boat at all?
Not really.
Okay.
And so we had the one, and it was in really good shape. And working with Richard on the boat... I learned how to hook up and start and operate a jet engine. It was really cool.
Yeah, I bet.
So I said to Richard, what do I need? And he just gave me a list of parts and things. So I thought, well, I'm going to put one on my truck. And he says, why? I said, to blow snow. I saw this old documentary of Union Pacific Railroad where they used to mount, and I think they still do, but they used to mount these jet engines on the front of the rail cars to blow the snow off of the tracks up through the mountains.
Uh-huh.
So I thought, well, I'll put one. Anyway, so Richard said, just make sure you build that rack so it can flex. Because when the jet engine gets hot, it'll expand, and you don't want the welds to break, or that thing will be down the street 2 miles.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So I put that together, and we tested it up at one of the ski resorts, and they loved it. But it was too expensive because jet fuel was,
How much was it a gallon at that point in time? Do you remember?
Oh, I can't remember. There's Jet A, there's JP4, diesel, but there's different classes. And I think it was, back then it was maybe $3 or $4 a gallon. But I had a 250-gallon tank on the back of the truck.
Wow.
And we operated for... See, when you're down on the ground and you're not up in the sky, where you have the elevation difference,
right?
You use a lot more fuel. And I went through about 200 gallons and cleared this parking lot.
So yeah, tell us about that, because I know you've said that the reason why you wanted to put this jet engine on top of your truck was to melt the snow instead of shovel the snow. And that's pretty fascinating. And I guess you took it up to one of the ski lodge parking lots and you tested it there. Tell us about that experience.
Well, I think it was Brighton. and it was partial dirt and partial asphalt. Well, the residual of the jet fuel on the asphalt really messed up the asphalt.
Oh, interesting.
Plus, it was so expensive. They said, well, yeah, thanks for the demonstration. And somewhere I've got an old 8mm film of it.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, me too.
So you blasted out the entire parking lot in how long? It was like a few minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, it took about 20 minutes.
20 minutes to melt the entire parking lot?
It was about a half acre.
And it was like just dry. It was just...
Not really, but it sure blew snow all over the place. We took out a couple of trees, and they says, "No, this is really cool, but we can't do this up here."
Took out a couple of trees. That's hilarious. What was your favorite car you've ever owned?
Oh, the first car I ever had was my 180 Mercedes diesel. It was really slow. But it was I had it all cherried out with a 4-track stereo.
4-track, wow.
And I took 4 speakers from the drive-in and put 2 in each of the doors.
The metal speakers?
Well, not the whole box.
Okay, the speaker from inside.
The speakers. And my second favorite car was my 1980 Cadillac. You remember that, don't you?
Oh, yeah,
the black
it was a
one.
Seville, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That was a fun car.
Yeah, I bet.
I got that after I got divorced from your mom. And she hated that car.
Wow.
Because the girls would just flock.
Oh, boy.
It was really bad. Anyway, go ahead.
That's funny. Yeah, so I've got quite a few of the questions out that I've wanted to ask, and I'm sure if I dedicated another week or so putting together questions, we could sit here for 2 hours. But I know that as you're sitting there looking at your watch. So my dad is easily one of the most impatient people I've ever met, which is pretty funny. But
I won't disagree with that. That's one of my worst downfalls. That's probably why I'm still single after all these years. Because I am really one of the most impatient people I have ever known.
Yeah, me too. You're actually the number one person.
I thought you were
most. Oh no, I'm not impatient. I'm pretty patient with things. But,
yeah, you are.
Yeah. Anyway, is there anything else you'd like to share with us about any of your endeavors or any fun things that you just want to throw out?
Yeah, one of my old high school buddies who was in the Purple Explosion, where we won the Battle of the Bands. Brad Hayden got a PhD in physics and math and all that.
Wow.
And he called me out of the blue saying, "Well, let's get a band together." He said, and he left a message. It was so funny. "I've got 5 songs I've written." And he says, "I could play the keyboards, or if worse comes to worse, I can play bass." And he says, "I've got 5 of the coolest songs." Anyway, to make a long story short, I said, "Well, you live in California. Why don't you move to Salt Lake?" And he says, "Why don't you move down here? And we'll start a band." He said, "We need horns. We need girl singers. We need to find some handsome guy that can sing like,
Frank Sinatra style.
Whatever." But no, he's doing some rock and roll stuff. But
cool.
We talk about once a week, and he keeps leaving messages. But that's probably the neatest thing that's happened in the last couple of years. Out of the blue, I looked at my email, and it said, "Trying to contact Larry Woodland. This is Brad Hayden, PhD, your old keyboard player."
Wow.
Out of 30 years plus? But
yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually did want to ask you this. What were some of your favorite concerts you'd ever been to? And is there any particular experiences that were just mind-blowing of people that you got to see live? And where did you see them?
Salt Lake City. It was a place called the Terrace Ballroom. And then Lagoon used to have a concert thing out there. At Lagoon, I saw The Doors, the Mothers of Invention. That's Frank Zappa.
Yep.
And they were all dressed up like girls with red lipstick on, and they were so
That's
funny.
amazing.
Jimi Hendrix at Lagoon. And then the coolest bands were at the Terrace Ballroom, downtown Salt Lake. It's all offices now. They tore it all down.
Yeah.
Jefferson Airplane, Vanilla Fudge. Oh, gee. Oh, Janis Joplin.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Before she was, nobody knew who she was then, but, she
Wow.
could really sing. And there were 2 or 3 others I can't remember, but yeah.
Which one do you think did the craziest concert? Like, it was just mind-blowing. You'd never seen anybody do it before.
The Mothers of Invention with Frank Zappa.
Oh, I could imagine.
Where they had these dolls and they'd pull their heads off and throw them out in the audience. Yeah.
And didn't you say that Jimi Hendrix lit his hair on fire on stage out at Lagoon or some wild thing?
Yeah, he had a wig on, and it went up in flames. Then he turned around and he disappeared someplace, but he took it off, and then he came back out and started playing again.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and Led Zeppelin. They were really good.
I could imagine.
They were really good.
And where did they play? Was that at Terrace or was that at Lagoon?
Terrace Ballroom.
Okay. Wow, that's really cool. Anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up our first episode?
Nope. I guess I could ramble on forever, but I appreciate being here. And thanks for the interview, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let me take a look and see. Take one more thing here. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our very first interview for Always the Journey podcast. Again, the reason and motivation behind this podcast is really delve in people's backgrounds and histories and things that they've experienced and different successes or failures or hard lessons. And sometimes it's not easy to share yourself and put yourself out there, but that's what this is all about. And we've had a lot of fun doing this. So again, shout out to everyone who's going to be able to check this out. Appreciate you listening. And again, this is a wrap for episode 1, Always the Journey podcast, Salt Lake City, Utah. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, my name is Jason Woodland, your host, and I look forward to seeing you on episode number 2.